Hello and welcome to the India Hangout. The Supreme Court has cancelled the allocation of coal blocks, 214 out of 218 in a somewhat sudden move, though it was expected in many ways. What we are trying to understand is what is the impact of this specifically on the economy, on industry, but more importantly on the investment climate, particularly in the context of Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States, where business and economy will be the key discussion points at this time. Joining us to do all of this, R.P. Singh, former chairman of the Power Grid Corporation of India, Subir Gokan, director of research at Brookings Institution in India, and Prasad Kapurkar, senior director at CRISIL Research, who's also prepared a report, a quick one, on the impact of this cancellation of coal blocks. So let me begin with you, Prasad, very quickly. Can you tell us how have you analyzed the impact of this on industry, on which segment of industry is most likely to be affected?
Right. Well, I think the impact is on essentially on three sectors. And I think the most important impacted sectors from a short-term perspective is metal, linked to us. Power sector, at least from the operational blocks which have been deallocated, the impact is going to be limited because most of the power projects which were drawing coal from these operational blocks, they're on a fixed return basis. So barring, I think, only one operator, most of the power projects currently will not be impacted because of the operational blocks getting reallocated. However,
Okay.
the other non-operational blocks will be impacted. On the steel side, however, we see a significant impact. We expect secondary steel producers whose mines are going to now get reallocated. Their margins can go down by anywhere between 800 to 1,000 basis points, which is a very, very severe blow.
Okay, great. Mr. Singh, can I come to you now? We've sort of touched upon this subject in the past as well. How do you see the impact of this decision on the power sector, particularly on the production side?
Let me tell you, I see it as a very positive development in a total negative scenario because there was a lot of expectations, lot of hobnobbing, and I mean the whole thing was very murky, the way the whole thing was happening and all that. So now at least the uncertainty is over, and the power plants which are languishing for want of coal, there will be a definite action from the government side, and I'm sure government must have prepared and is preparing because 6 months time the Honorable Court has given. So in this period the uncertainty will be over, and those power plants which have been built and are languishing for supply of coal, they will be definitely benefited. As far as those who have been, I mean, by the action of the decision of the Honorable Court are hurt, of course they are in problem, but that problem is limited compared to the capacity which was languishing, say around 40,000 megawatts.
Right. So can I request you, Mr. Singh, to dwell a little more on that in terms of the capacity that is lying unused and the amount of coal that was required earlier, which could have been sourced from domestic coal mines, and therefore the gap in terms of what has to be done quickly in the next 6 months to bring things back to even keel.
Let me tell you, I have been a keen watcher of what is happening in the power sector. Definitely there were a lot of gaming and a lot of persuasion and lobbying, etc., etc. At least that is over, and in my opinion, such kind of gaming will definitely end in the industry because it has set the ball rolling in the right direction. So therefore, in my opinion, it is a welcome decision.
Right.
And the government should act very fast, and we should act in a very, very determined fashion with not opaque documents and opaque conditions. There should be clear. This is what we want to do, and these are the reasons why we want to do.
Right. And do you feel that this could cause the power situation from a generation point of view to tip into a crisis mode? Because could there be a gap at some point between coal that is available or could be available from these mines and the power that has to be produced? This is more a layman's question.
Definitely not. Reason is the Honorable Court has given you 6 months lead time to act. 6 months is a good period. The entire thing and the government can act within a month's time or maximum 2 months' time. And if we are on right direction, I mean, there is enough time for government to act. And there is pressure on Coal India. Coal India has to be regenerated, and they have to perform, and for that necessary action has to be taken from the government side.
Okay, Subir Gokan, let me come to you. So first is, what is the kind of economic impact that you're seeing of this decision? And secondly, and more importantly, what does this mean and how should we interpret the impact of this action, the overall investment and economic climate?
Well, on the first, I think the immediate impact has already been playing out over the last few years. When the new blocks were essentially stopped they had obviously not started production for the most part, and after the controversy erupted, there was very little likelihood that any production would come out of these new blocks. So in the meanwhile, we've been making up for our shortfall in coal by importing it. And at the time when our current account deficit had risen to that very frightening level of 4.8% of GDP, we were importing something like $8.5–9 billion worth of non-coking coal, which is what feeds into power and other uses. We, in any case, import $6 or $7 billion worth of coking coal, but that is specifically for the steel and metallurgical applications. But this was a huge shock to our balance of payments. And, in a sense, it was one of the key factors leading to the kind of instability we saw in the rupee when the various shocks hit us, because our balance of payments was so fragile. Now, of course, from that point on, there has been a significant improvement in the BOP. We're still importing that large quantity of coal, but we found other areas to reduce our vulnerability. So in that sense, we've used up whatever space we can to contain our balance of payments. We're stuck with this very large import bill of coal, which is going to grow because, we are talking about significant growth in power generation. We've got a lot of idle capacity, which somewhere has to start generating. And if we are to deal with the increasing demand for energy, then that is going to translate directly into increased demand for imported coal. And that's going to put pressure on the balance of payments. Our room to maneuver in response to external shocks is going to be constrained. So I think it is something that now locks us into a relatively long period of time when we are going to be dependent on imported coal. And that's really not a positive development. So the question is, how long is the system going to take to start getting more coal, substantially large amounts of coal out of the ground? And I think that is where perhaps the process side of the issue, the process and governance side of the issue has to be highlighted. It is now clear that the way in which we allocated these licenses was not up to speed. There was a fundamental problem with it. Now we have to decide on what the alternative process is. Right. Is it going to be auctions? Is it going to be revenue share? Whatever it is, I think we've got to make sure that we put a very robust mechanism in place, which is completely insulated from the kind of discretionary allocations that the previous process was accused of. And I think that is perhaps the long-term benefit that might come from this. We will go through a few years of pain on the balance of payment side, on the pricing, the cost side. But I hope what emerges is because this is not a one-off problem. We are in a regime where significant amounts of publicly owned assets, whether it's minerals or anything else, are going to be transferred to the private sector for effective ownership. We can't be doing this on an ad hoc basis. We can't be doing it as a one-off basis. We need a robust process. We need a process that is credible and transparent. And this is our opportunity to put that in place. So I hope that if that is done, that there is some long-term good that comes out of this. But the short-term consequences, obviously, both from the balance of payments perspective and, as you were pointing out, the investor confidence perspective are going to be negative. And the only way to restore investor confidence is to come out very quickly with an alternative process saying, look, this is something we're committed to doing, transparent, credible, robust, and reliable. And that should at least help to assuage investor concerns over the longer term.
I'm going to come back to the investor concern in a moment. But are you in agreement with Mr. R.P. Singh then that it was good that this was done because in a way it cleans up the slate completely so that we can start afresh?
Well, it had to be cleaned up because we were in a mess and there was no escape from that. There was no exit from that. without a fundamental change in direction. So in that sense, there is some closure to this process. I think it's good. We can start with a clean slate, absolutely. But we should not ignore then the short-term consequences, which we'll have to find ways to deal with. We can't handle this in a vacuum. Other things need to be done to buffer the economy against those short-term consequences.
Right. Prasad, if I were to come back to you, I know you described the impact of this decision on the metals and steel and power. What, according to you, is the most critical there? And also, I mean, keeping in mind what Subir just pointed out to us, which is the balance of payments impact that will obviously be there if we were to step up imports.
Yeah. I think the most critical part, if you really look at it, these coal blocks which are operational, we're producing about 40 million tons of coal. So roughly, just below about 8 to 10% of what currently we produce domestically. Assuming that, Coal India is able to take over and start running them, and we are not sure whether they will have that bandwidth to really operate it at similar level till the auction happens. The impact from a domestic demand supply may not be actually very, very severe. The bigger issue is that if the auction process doesn't happen quickly, definitely there will be an impact in terms of both, balance of payment as well as the linked investment, and therefore a big impact on the banking sector. Therefore, the key now is that, the transfer to Coal India happens smoothly and they are able to operate it at,
Right.
whatever, 40, 45 minutes. Plus, the auction process is very, very smooth and fast.
Right. Okay. Mr. Singh, if I were to ask you more, of course, having been on the consuming side of power and the distribution, I mean, as a distribution company, are you confident that Coal India can take up this slack? Because there is some concern on that front, isn't it?
Let me tell you, as far as Coal India performance is considered, I see only obstacle on the part of governance and their whole hog, involvement in meeting the challenge which is fallen in their lap. And the possible solution is what I had done in Power Grid in setting up a transmission line from Bhutan border to Delhi. On a public-private partnership, Tata and Power Grid, we established a joint venture where Tata owned 74% and Power Grid owned 26%. But we had a blocking right. So what we can do is to regenerate Coal India or assist Coal India and bring governance and transparency. We can go for similar PPP model, public-private partnership model. It is not that the way it is happening in roads and all that. I don't see that as a successful model. What we did with Tata, that is the most immediate and important solution. And you don't have to go for immediately auctioning this and that. Go for selecting joint venture partners and then determine the price through a regulator. It can be done very quickly. If I have to do, I can do it in a month's time. And I'm sure we can satisfy the Honorable Court, the Parliament, and the public at large.
Right. Okay. So that's one option, or that's one way of going forward. Subir, how do you see it? I mean, are there ways to sort of accelerate and speed up this particular part of the process? I mean, like Mr. Singh says.
Well, I think there are. I have no familiarity with Coal India as an organization, so I'm not in a position to judge whether it has the capacity to quickly ramp up production. But a few months ago, when this problem was becoming very acute, there was some talk of sort of contract mining arrangement, which is essentially Coal India, being the umbrella for distribution and so on, which retains its monopoly character, but getting relatively large and reputed private companies in to actually dig the coal out of the ground. And then we have a number of mining companies. Some of them are mining coal in captive mines, but basically, getting coal out of the ground is like getting anything else out of the ground. If you have the expertise to do one, you should be able to do the other.
Right.
That may be an interim solution where Coal India remains in charge, but capacity is quickly added on by bringing private players into the field. But this is an interim solution which has to dovetail into the larger question of how we actually give more permanent mining rights, and whether this is to be auctioned or whether this is to be on a revenue share basis, and if so, how do you select the companies that are to be? that is a design, a contract, and a sort of a process design exercise which has to be started, but will not provide an interim solution. So I think we can see something like a interim period of contract mining, which I think is the right way to do it. The government did not go very far on that. I don't know why, but I think that is a possible solution. But the longer term issue of private mining, and not just mining for captive use, but for commercial sale, I think that we have to resolve, and that's a very long-term issue. So it needs a very robust and a complicated governance mechanism, I think.
And I'm guessing it also involves changing the or rewriting the Coal Mining Nationalization Act.
Absolutely.
Because, yeah.
So that's one fundamental change that's required. Yeah.
Right. So Prasad, let me come back to you. So is there a bulletproof solution? I mean, or as foolproof a solution as possible to the next round of mineral and resource raising in the way we have? I mean, given all our energy demands, all our resource demands, and is there some way to ensure that things don't go wrong as far as possible the next time, or as we go into this next round of resource allocation and resource extraction?
Yeah, I think that's a really critical question, because I think the entire bankability of any of these licenses or permits is absolutely critical for ensuring that funding happens. And I think in the last couple of years, clearly that confidence has been shaken because of the events that have happened. So some way, I think overall, but I agree with what Sudhir and the other guest said. And probably this is a good way to start on a clean slate. In all likelihood now, the only way to really go ahead on any resource allocation is some sort of an auction process. And therefore, I think the chances of issues coming up at a later stage will be minimal. So, but the exact mechanism, because especially in a coal where commercial mining is not allowed, as we said, it's going to be a little difficult and complicated. How the auction process and what key parameters you work on, depending upon what is the end use sector. So I think that needs to be worked out. I don't think there is any clear solution at this moment.
Right. Mr. Singh, if I were to put the same question to you, how do we create a design solution, or what's the ideal design solution to ensure that we don't have a repeat of what we've had in coal, or for that matter, telecom spectrum?
Govind, exactly what I'm saying you, that, immediate solution is that we go for public-private partnership model, where Coal India can be 51% partner and 49% will be the private partner. What one gentleman was talking about, private mining and all that, this is a much better model. The private company will be represented on the board. They will have the decision blocking right. The funds will come. Their manpower, their talent, their asset can be utilized to the extent of 49%. And better management will come. And it will be a very, very strong joint venture partnership. This is the immediate solution, And you announce it that you are going to decide joint venture partner. These are the criteria and all that,
right,
based on decide, and you have a regulator immediately.
Right. Okay. Subir, let me come to the sort of the last question, really. I mean, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is off to the United States. It is mostly an economic, not entirely, but mostly an economic, I mean, the theme is economic and attracting investment, meetings with big CEOs on Wall Street, off Wall Street. This is obviously one of those issues which is going to come up. So how should we be looking at this and responding to this?
Well, I think the two sort of positives, if one can put it that way, that ultimately what was clearly a sort of crisis in the offing was in some sense, prevented by the combination of executive and judicial, use of authority, if you will. So it does show that there is a working, functional judicial, framework which prevents the public interest from being completely compromised. And that's one story line that emerges from this whole episode. Two, I think he will have to offset the negative sentiment that comes from this by offering and promising to put in place a robust and encompassing governance framework for the transfer of mineral rights. I don't think, we are very fixated on coal right now, but the problem is not specific to coal. Of course, other minerals are also extracted by the private sector. But look at iron ore. We've had a different kind of problem, but with the same effect. We had to cut iron ore production dramatically as a result of Supreme Court rulings, and that also had a very severe impact on balance of payments. We stopped. We lost $4.5–5 billion worth of iron ore exports almost overnight. So. This is a deeper problem of reconciling stakeholder interests in the exploitation of minerals. And we need, I think, a much more robust and visible governance process than we have right now to handle these issues. So I think he has to make some headway in at least offering to do this so that we don't get into the same problem in the future. And of course, the insulation is a little bit that this was a different government, and he's starting off with a clean slate. I think that is an opportunity as to reinforce the message.
Right. So let me get a quick sum up from Prasad as well. Prasad, in keeping with this larger theme of investment coming in from outside, there was Japan, there's China, and now the United States. A lot of investors are looking, and so are domestic investors who are looking for comfort on these issues. What's the one thing that, apart from what you've already talked about, that you feel we should be looking or focused on to ensure that there is normalcy returns to the investment climate as a whole in coming days and weeks?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Last point was whether
how do we bring back a sense of normalcy or a perception of normalcy in the investment climate, given all the efforts that we've been making to attract investment both overseas and Indian?
Okay. No, I think on that side, clearly, barring these issues on, which have been lingering for last 2 years. On the other side, I think we are clearly making progress, whether, in terms of clarity on retrospective taxation, reducing, the withholding tax rate for debt investment, opening up more sectors for FDI. I think these are steps which have already been taken. Obviously, some of these were low-hanging fruits. The real challenge is, things which yesterday I was sitting at a Chinese company when this actually news broke out. And while they were clearly not very happy about what was happening, they said, we understand that, it's part of the cleaning process. And as long as this results into a much better, robust mechanism, we would be okay to look at India, because we believe it's still a very critical market.
Right, and I think that's a good note to end on as well. And Mr. Singh, last word from you. What would we need to do to create a more friendly and welcoming investment climate?
In fact, as I told you in the beginning itself, that Honorable Supreme Court decision is a welcome decision. It has ended the uncertainty of coal mining, whatever was happening. So it is a positive indication that yes, India is a democratic country where there is an established judiciary system, and whatever you do, if you do it within the defined boundary, it is a strong nation to invest. So this action of the Honorable Supreme Court is very much welcome. The only thing is that the government has to show that it means business and it means governance, which was missing in the country. Right. Now that government has to demonstrate.
Right, and we've heard the Make in India proclamation, and hopefully that will result or lead to far more investment, and of course investment climate accompanying that. Gentlemen, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us on the India Hangout. We'll be back tomorrow same time. Thanks for watching.